This is Sunday, May the 17th, and this is the video for Friday, May the 15th. So let's start off where we always do, which is looking at the FinViz market overall. Volume ticked a little bit higher, it would seem, than what we're used to. This is the Dow, the S&P. We're going to look at the New York Stock Exchange total in a second, about 3,000 stocks. Sort of a zigzaggy day, finished, barely positive. Apple was down, Microsoft was up, Google, Facebook, Amazon. Advancers led to decliners in the FinViz world, and it wasn't that much different on the New York Stock Exchange. But we can see that, let's just go to our bigger chart here. We can see that the oscillator took a little bit of a bounce higher, which means it could be returning to test the middle line, or it could be going down. It's just, look at what's happened to the Dow Jones in the meantime. It's just sort of chopping around. It's been in a very narrow range now since about April the 6th. So over a month now we've been in a very narrow range for the Dow Jones. The stacked volume looks like this. It was a little bit less than Thursday. Third best day of the week. Overall, it looks like volume is picking up. If we compare this week to last week, the volume is certainly picking up. If we compare it to the previous week, it's probably the same, but it's higher than the previous 2 weeks. So volume is picking up a little bit. Here was the advancers versus decliner in terms of total shares traded. Fewer advancers traded and more of the decliners were traded than the prior day. So although we had higher volume and although we saw the McClellan oscillator tick a little bit higher, we didn't have that reflected in the number of shares traded, and the summation index continues to pull back a little bit, and you got to wonder if we aren't going to see something like this or the reverse of this, where we've already had this big down drop from here to here, and now we may be looking for this little leg over here as the market looks for some kind of a footing to determine, is this economy reopening for real or not? Let's look at the S&P on a daily. This is the weekly chart. No, it's the daily chart. Thursday was the big tell. That was the bounce off the bottom of the cloud. Our high point today didn't show any interaction with any of the moving averages. So the S&P moving resistance on the 50, Chiku span on the 50 is going to decrease as the week goes on. There's going to be lower and lower resistance levels, but right now the resistance level is the 8 EMA. On a weekly basis, we're in the cloud. So we're drifting in the cloud after having gotten this rejection about 2 weeks ago off the bottom of the cloud for the Chiku span. So just keep an eye on that. That is a weird looking cloud. So let's go back and just refresh that, because we shouldn't see something that looks like that. And there we go. That's a little bit better. So forget that other cloud. It was an anomaly. Shouldn't have been there. And we've got today, this week was, look at that rejection right off of the 200. So on a daily basis, our low was the top of the daily cloud, and our high was the 200 daily moving average. And we can see that here. So those were the two defining points. So we're looking for a break one way or the other before we can declare that the market is going up or the market is going down, frankly. Apple was down a little bit, although it finished at the top of its range, so that's very encouraging for Apple. This pulled back to 78.6% may be, all that we see unless there's a severe correction. Apple's still a great stock to hold on to. It paid its dividend last week, Thursday or Friday. Caterpillar, still no indication that you want to sell the stock. No indication yet that it's a good time to buy the stock. There's no positive indicators for Caterpillar. FSLY, still moving higher. Nice trade, Andy. GDX has now made a clear break above the trend line. So if you wanted to get into gold in a derivative kind of play, that would be to buy the bigger gold miners, or you could buy the JDX, fourth symbol, which would be the junior miners, but the JDX is the bigger miners. It's a whole basket of them. Home Depot has its earnings on Tuesday morning before the bell. So I intend on taking a position, because you look at this little pullback from the Gartley. Well, now we've started another pattern, and because earnings are happening Tuesday morning, I am going to be taking a pretty good position in addition to what I already have for Home Depot. If it were to pull back, the stock that I have would benefit because my calls are already in the money. So I'm going to buy something that's a little bit more, out of the money, and hedge my bets with covered calls. But I'll tweet that out on maybe either mid-morning or mid-afternoon on Monday. I'm going to make the decision. But the volatility should be pretty sweet. It should be up in 65-70%, making the affordability to buy calls rather high, but making the premium that you collect on covered calls pretty good. Whirlpool, still nothing, still in the cloud. Amazon, a little bit of a pullback, not too much. Let's take a look at some of the other ones that we looked at. Where are we? Let's look at W, really pulling back, and now it should be looking for support at the top of this gap. So we thought that it would pull back, and that's why I sold most of my position, but I still have a few, and doesn't look like I'm going to have any success with those. NAT, really pulling back. No indication that this would be the favored place to store oil offshore. Tech, this is a weekly, so finished with this sort of iron cross, hanging man type of at the top of its range for the week. Let's take a look at it for the day. Still, it's broken out of this little wedge, but it's just not moving anywhere, and you still got the gap up ahead, so that's not something really to move into. CrowdStrike, again, just not really doing anything. And NVDA certainly had its big day. So there's the completion of the Gartley pattern. Let's take a look at and see what happens. We would expect now that there were sellers up here. Let's take a look at the volume, and the volume was quite high. So there would have been certainly some selling going on at this D position on this alternate bat pattern, which is now complete. So that's it for the day. What do we look at now? We look at the S&P, and we look at the McClellan indicator. The S&P on a weekly basis, let's look at the week. That's the SPY. Let's look at the SPX on a weekly basis. We have resistance of the 8 daily moving average. We're sort of, the Chiku span is in between these two moving averages. Price is between the cloud and the 200. Not really able to call it in one direction or the other. And the McClellan oscillator tells us similarly that we're in between a neutral position and oversold. So it's sort of wishy-washy signals. The only thing I would be interested in doing is holding on to the stock that I have with the covered calls that I have, and certainly getting into Home Depot without a doubt in a bullish fashion for Monday's earnings. Tuesday morning's earnings, I'm sorry.